There's big money in sport. We're talking billions and billions. Financial regulations in football were introduced to keep spending in check. But are clubs really following the rules or just trying their best not to get caught? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. A 10-point deduction for Everton in the English Premier League was a warning. Spend within the limits or else.
November 17th was a difficult day for Everton Football Club.
Myself and everybody at the club are shocked and disappointed by the ruling of the Premier League Commission. We believe the sanction is disproportionate and wholly unjust.
After an immediate 10-point deduction, the club went from 14th spot to second last. Everton is appealing the decision. The Premier League concluded the team breached its profit and sustainability rules that state no club can exceed losses of £105 million over 3 years. This is to prevent teams from overspending, taking on too much debt, and risking the club's future. It was brought in as a result of Portsmouth going into administration in 2010, having racked up £135 million in debts. Now the rules have become a de facto spending cap, as wealthy owners have put more of their own money into their clubs. Spending has steadily increased for most of the top 6 Premier League teams. In particular, Man City's outgoings increased after it was taken over by the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund in 2008. As the saying goes, you have to spend money to make money, and these clubs certainly do that. Manchester United is the most valuable club at nearly $6 billion, but the top 6 teams all bring in billions. But will the Everton case send a message? Chelsea is also facing breaches, and Manchester City has more than 100 allegations to answer for.
You question me like we have been punished. And in that moment, we are innocent until guilt is proven. So I know the people want it. I know it, I feel it. But wait and see it, and the sentence will be done, and after we come here and explain it.
Man City's trial isn't expected before autumn 2024. But with legal challenges mounting, will all these questions around financing risk tarnishing the beautiful game?
Let's meet our guests. The football journalist Robert Wheeler joins us from Surrey in England. Sanny Rudravajhala is in Manchester. And in London, we have Lee Hoos. He is Chief Executive Officer at Queen's Park Rangers. And with me here in the studio, we have Hugo Hensley, Head of Sports Services Brand Finance. Lee, I'll come to you first of all. You're running a professional football club and you were running it professionally. What were your thoughts on everything that happened with Everton and the mistakes they obviously made?
Well, I don't know the complete details of the Everton situation. Obviously, with QPR, we've been down that road before with our own problems with FFP. So it's always a tough line to walk. On the one hand, you need the club to be sustainable, versus the other hand, you also want to be as competitive as you possibly can. So trying to walk that line is sometimes not as easy as it appears from outside. Obviously, Everton have appealed it. It'll be interesting to see what happens with their appeal. Because I know that when we got fined for our FFP breaches, the reasoning of the decision wasn't exactly crystal clear. It wasn't the most well-polished legal opinion I've ever seen, to put it mildly. And in fact, some people have said, "Wow, that's quite an interesting legal opinion you've got there. I'm not quite sure what to make out of it." So, if nothing else, I look forward to a reasoned legal decision out of what comes from their issues.
Lee, what kind of earthquake feeling has it sent around the world of football that a club can get clobbered with a 10-point deduction for something that the players weren't responsible for? I mean, all of this happened in the boardroom and higher up.
Well, it's not the first. You've had examples of championship clubs facing points deductions as well. So it's the fact that it's the first Premier League club that this has actually happened to. So that's just it goes with the territory in terms of how the rules are written. So having already had it once, a couple of times actually in the championship. It's really just a matter of the fact that you've now seen the Premier League for the first time, and will be obviously interesting has broad ramifications on what happens with other clubs up there as well. Obviously Manchester City currently have their own issues in which they're dealing. So that that will be an interesting one too when it finally comes to the end on that one.
Sanny, do you think it was a fair punishment for what they did? Everton, 10 points, effectively sending them into a relegation battle all season.
Well, the first thing I should mention, Ender, is I have skin in the game here. As my team, Bury FC, were in the English Football League for 125 years, and they were kicked out of the EFL in 2019 because the owner couldn't prove he had the finance to keep running the club. And that set a precedent then that the likes of QPR and the rest of the divisions below the Premier League in the English Football League system know that if something like this happens and there's a major breach or major violation of the rules, well, the worst case scenario is what's happened to Bury. Now, the thing is, the Premier League haven't had this. The only time we've seen a points deduction was Portsmouth for administration, and that was, some time ago, and not similar to this situation. So, I spend a lot of time reporting at Everton, and I've spoken to the fans, and I understand exactly why they feel singled out and victimised and really frustrated. You look down the road at Manchester City, they'll point to issues around there. But the thing is, as with all English law, there's precedent that things are built upon. And in the Premier League, there hasn't been any. And I know firsthand what that precedent can be. So although I feel like there's certainly a lot of issues around the decision that kind of make it a bit tricky, overall, you've got to have something. Otherwise, where do you draw the line?
Robert, how do you think Everton fans are going to react for the rest of the season if this points deduction stays? I mean, we've seen how angry they are already. They'll keep fighting, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just going to galvanise them. We saw it at the Goodison Park in their first game after the points deduction against Manchester United. I think it seemed like the fans turned up and were up for it, but the players weren't. They lost 3-0. But their next game against Nottingham Forest away, they won 1-0. And yeah, I think Sean Dyche just has to really galvanise their fan group, their club, be like, the world's against us. And yeah.
And it's a club with a huge history, Robert. I mean, the Premier League without Everton in it, and it is a possibility now, given that points deduction. I mean, that would really set them back as well, because going to a new stadium, dropping a division, potentially playing Leeds club QPR season next, I mean, that is not something Everton fans will want, with the greatest of respect to QPR.
No, I mean, we've never seen the Premier League without Everton. They're a massive club. We've got the new stadium just coming around the corner. I mean, it would absolutely be devastating for the club to have that new ground in the Championship.
Hugo, on the branding side of things, how much of an issue now has the Premier League got with huge names and legal cases coming down the line in 2024? You've got Manchester City, you've got Chelsea, and we could be looking at a very different Premier League in 18 months' time.
Yeah, I think these big names are some of the biggest attraction for fans, especially the global audience, which I think we saw recently, yesterday, when they announced the new broadcasting deal. That's where they expect the revenue growth to come from in the future. But as we've seen, Manchester City have taken over the Premier League. Other clubs will fill their place. I think part of the difficulty is seeing the league as poorly managed, perhaps financially unstable, which could deter some of the sponsors, which are so important to keeping the revenues coming in, the size of the league and its competition with the others. So can you imagine a bank coming in and sponsoring Everton or Manchester City once they're seen as not financially towing the line?
And just tell me, on the branding side of things, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? The Premier League is global. You travel the world and you see primarily now Manchester City and Chelsea jerseys. Years ago, it used to be Manchester United.
Yeah, it shows how fast it changes and how easy these audiences can be attracted. But the Premier League, through our research at Brand Finance, we've seen is the most attractive league in the world. And a lot of that, when you look at the different attributes, so star players or the competitions involved, a lot of it's driven actually by the competition within the league. Is it seen as competitive? And the Premier League manages to be the most competitive in the world based on fan perceptions. And that's a lot due to the fact that they have, I think, the most equitable distribution of the broadcasting revenues of any of the top European leagues. And that's what creates this ability to keep that competition high. And so financial fair play, I think, especially at the top end, was brought in to make sure that those teams actually aren't able to go beyond their means. But I think the difficulty with things like Everton is where at the bottom end, it's almost applied to keep teams in their lane. So an ambitious team like Everton trying to break out and grow the brand and the business is held back by that because they've taken a risk.
Lee, what does it do to morale at a club when you are hit with such a huge points deduction? You've got players working their hearts out, the staff behind the scenes, and then you have this massive, big, clobbering sucker punch coming in. What does it do around the club when you're trying so hard, to keep everything going?
With a club like Everton, I think you're right. I think it has galvanized a number of people. I think Sean Dyche is an excellent manager. I worked with Sean at Burnley. I know what he's capable of doing. If anybody can get them out of it, he certainly can. We talked. You mentioned earlier about it's about keeping clubs sustainable versus keeping clubs in their lane, and that really is a fundamental point that probably needs to be addressed. What is the real purpose of the financial fair play rules, or profitability and sustainability rules, as they're called now? Is it about the fair play and trying to make it a more equitable competition, or is it about sustainability? Because from a sustainability standpoint, well, in the championship, you can lose 39 million over 3 years, but at the end of the day, if you're £1, if you can't pay a debt of £1, you still go into administration. So from a financial sustainability standpoint, it almost doesn't make sense. And when you're talking about just trying to keep clubs, relatively unstable, maybe, but you still got parachute payments coming down that affect that as well. So with clubs who do get relegated, so the whole thing really needs a complete revamp in terms of what is it we're trying to accomplish here. You can talk about ambition, but it's making sure that whoever's ambitious also has the means to keep that club going, not just through next season, but the season after that, the season after that, and the season after that. Because you're right about the Everton fans. Let's face it. The fans are the ones who will be absolutely in turmoil with this whole thing. Players know, deep down inside, a player knows, I can just go somewhere else if I'm good enough. But the fans, they can't, you don't just change, okay, I think I'll support Liverpool now. Don't see that happening up at Everton.
And Lee, tell me, when fans come up to you, everyone wants their club to be doing well. Do you get fans saying, why haven't we bought this fella? Why can't we invest in that? And I mean, this is your perfect answer now, isn't it? Fans been asking that for years. It's still the same answer. The questions come over and over, but the answers are still the same, which is, yeah, we are constrained by profitability and sustainability rules. The old days are out the window where we can just go out and write a check for, all I had to do was ask the board for more money and they gave it to me. Can't do that now under the current rules. The danger, of course, it still doesn't prevent clubs from gambling, though, because some clubs will still go, right, we can lose 39 million over 3 years. I'm going to shoot the whole 39 million in 2 years, and then they're stuffed in the third year of their business plan if they don't make it. So as I say, from a financial standpoint, there's still quite a few weaknesses in the whole system. How much does that tempt you, Lee? What you just said, shoot the 39 million, just have one major push for the Premier League to get back to the promised land with QPR, or is it just absolutely a no-no?
You can see the consequences of that if it doesn't go right is, you can see what happens with points deductions if it doesn't go right. So I think that's the risk on that probably outweighs the benefit in terms of trying to go for it. It's a bit like playing the lottery. I wouldn't want to bet my house payments, on the fact that I'll win the lottery and I don't have to worry about making payments anymore.
Sanny, let's talk about Manchester City, reigning champions, going for a fourth title on the spin. It's never been done before in the Premier League. They have a big juggernaut coming at them next year in the form of 115 alleged breaches of financial fair play. And these allegations, I mean, if one of them is proven, given Everton's experience, this could result in potential relegation.
Well, that's the argument that gets put, certainly by Everton fans as well, the 1 versus the 115. City would argue that, what the issues are certainly much more complex, and I don't think anyone could disagree with that, which is why this thing is rumbling on. Yeah, you're right. Now we've got a precedent. In theory, if one of those breaches happens, then yeah, you've got a similar deduction. 115, who knows? They might be in the same division as my team, who are now in the 9th division. So yeah, when you look at it like that, you could say that. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And the accountancy and the issues specifically around Manchester City are so complex. A web has to be untangled. It needs a web of lawyers to do that. And that's why this is kicking on to maybe 2025. And at that point you start to wonder about the integrity of the whole competition. But yeah, it feels a lot more complicated, and that's why this one, unfortunately, is just going to keep rumbling on.
That's a good point, Robert, isn't it? That Everton's case has been dealt with very quickly, their fans would say very harshly, and Manchester City and Chelsea have got lawyered up, and we're no nearer any outcome on both of those cases.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Everton just had one charge and it seems to be dealt with pretty quickly. It's going to take years for them to go through all of Manchester City's 115 cases. I mean, will they get 1,150 points deducted and end up playing Sonny's team Bury? I mean, we don't know. I mean, they're going to get lawyered up. They've already had it with UEFA being charged by them and they've managed to get around that one. So who knows? They might just be able to do that again.
Hugo, a lot of discussion about what should happen to City and Chelsea if they are found to have breached the rules. Some people are saying they could have previous titles taken off them. For example, Chelsea won the league in 2017, runners-up were Tottenham Hotspur. No one wants to win the league this way, do they? Finishing second and then being given a title 6-7 years down the line.
I think they'd rather have it than not, if you're a Spurs fan. But I think part of it is saying, OK, Everton have had their 10 points applied now. What can you do to Man City? And I think it's got to be of the scale of relegation or taking that title away for it really to be adjudged as a fair punishment. Because all it does is says to the teams like Newcastle, who have a lot of money and could say, what does one title mean this year? You know, we can take 5 years of harsh punishment after that to give that to the fans. Champions League success, whatever it is, you know, seeing these cases run out, I think something serious needs to be done that means that it actually is a precedent and suggests that you can't, as it was, go for broke and then take the punishment later.
So a financial penalty would mean nothing to clubs like Chelsea or Man City because they can just pay it without even breaking sweat. But what would really hurt them is the points deduction.
Yeah, and taking their integrity and credibility away, damage the brand, make them less attractive to the sponsors, and pushing them into, say, the Championship would mean that actually the means testing of sponsorships would mean you could no longer say this sponsorship's worth 60 million because the exposure and the testing they do on that to see if it's an appropriately priced sponsorship would no longer add up again. And so that would hurt the business sort of on an ongoing basis in that way to sort of bring it back to parity, perhaps.
Lee, you're at games every week. You're talking to fellow CEOs, the people who run clubs. What was the reaction to the Everton penalty when you were travelling the country the last few weeks?
To be honest, it hasn't been discussed much at the games I've been at. It's because it's a Premier League issue. Obviously, we've got our own issues to worry about in the Championship. And quite frankly, the bigger topic of conversation I've had with my fellow CEOs has been about redistribution and how that can work going forward. You know, the possibility of a football regulator coming on board, you know, whether that's a benefit or is it something that's really needed in football because it's the only way that we're ever going to get some kind of fairness in terms of the redistribution model. That's been much more prevalent than you know what's going on at Everton.
And tell me, just on the money side of things, you're obviously running a professional, competent, professional football club. Is this in the back of your mind with every deal and, you know, you're constantly watching the bottom line and making sure you are within the certain limits that you don't get in trouble?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Always got there. There's a point of, you know, you can push the envelope, but, you know, only push the envelope so far. You don't want to get into a position where it's completely unmanageable, and there's no way back, absent the fact you're saying, oh my God, I got to sell, you know, 5 players in January in order to meet this, which you never do. You know, that's the situation you absolutely do not want to be. You know, in terms of us, you know, we went, part of our core business plan is we do sell players. But you know, we had 2 seasons where you know it looked like we could move forward. We didn't get the offers we wanted to get in for players. So it's like, well, there's no point in selling them for less than what we think. You know, we'll hold on to them and try and have a go. But that's about as far as you can take it. You know, this year because of that, then we took all free transfers. We didn't have, you know, there was no capital spend whatsoever. We sold a couple of players, but the money that was reinvested in free transfers as opposed to going out and paying fees for players.
And the dream, of course, for QPR is to get back up to where you belong in the top flight, playing against Liverpool, United, City, Chelsea?
Absolutely, that's the dream. I think that's the dream of 23 other clubs in the Championship too, though. So there are a lot of people with the same dream, and unfortunately, only 3 of them can realise that dream.
Sanny, have we reached a stage where it's all about money, really? And look at what Manchester City have spent in the last few seasons. It obviously pays off having a guy like Erling Haaland, £500,000 a week wages reportedly, getting the goals, Grealish, everyone else that they have, top-notch world-class talent. Have we reached a stage now with the Premier League where you genuinely get what you pay for?
Well, you could say the Premier League has kind of always been this way. Think back to when Blackburn Rovers won it and were bankrolled by a local businessman, and they paid X amount of money for Alan Shearer back in the day before he then got sold on for more. So the argument that it's all about money now maybe isn't quite fair, because it's always kind of been this way. I think the real issue is becoming how great those numbers have become when we talk about QPR in the division below and the teams in the Championship. To get into the Premier League, it is a gamble. You've just got to really speculate, try and accumulate, and then you can see other teams like Reading who've fallen from the Premier League and now in the 3rd tier and struggling, might go into the 4th tier. So the problem that's really happened now is the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The Premier League and outside the Premier League has got so large that chasm makes issues exacerbated, and to try and spend to get in the top flight is loads more than it used to be. And stuff like the fairy tales we've seen of Luton Town this season, for example, that's extremely rare. And that's kind of one of the beauties of football we might be kind of losing, especially from the English pyramid, where anyone can come from the bottom division, go all the way to the top. Feels like that's less of a possibility these days.
Robert, Chelsea's new American owners self-reported on this issue. They went through the books and they realised that there were some discrepancies or some issues that had not been correctly put through that they weren't happy with. And they reported themselves to the authorities. Do you think they're in a slightly better position because of that than, say, Manchester City?
Yeah, you would hope so, because it wasn't Todd Bowley and the American owners' fault about this. I mean, it was payments that come under scrutiny under Roman Abramovich, so the sins of the father shouldn't go onto the son. So you would have hoped so, and especially with them owning up to it themselves, that they would, rather than with Manchester City's case, where it is the current owners that have reportedly, allegedly breached financial fair play rules.
And just tell me on that point, do you think Chelsea will be looking at this nervously as well going into 2024 and just wondering that if Everton got hit with 10 points, what's going to happen then?
Yeah, definitely. I think all clubs who are allegedly in trouble will be. 10 points is massive in the Premier League. For Everton especially, they might go down. I mean, for Manchester City and Chelsea, it could cost them a Champions League place or whatever. So they will be very nervous about this.
Hugo, from the branding perspective, looking around the world, the Premier League has just accelerated past everyone, hasn't it? Serie A, when I was growing up, was the place to be, the league to play in. Then it was the turn of La Liga in Spain. But now it's very much everyone wants to come to England.
Yeah, I think it's not definite, though, and it's not forever. I mean, currently, the performances of English teams in European football have been driving that as well. So that's got an even wider footprint than just the Premier League itself. And also that competition element, where do you want to watch Barcelona and Real Madrid fighting it out in La Liga, or for 10 years Juventus, 10 years Bayern Munich, 10 years PSG almost, or do you want to watch a league that actually has that dynamism? And that's the brand of the Premier League and what they're trying to put out there, that it is that competitive element. And they're really putting it at risk with some of these financial fair play, I suppose, rule mishaps, where they haven't quite got the rules right in terms of understanding what needs to be applied to the different business models across the pyramid. So those top clubs where it's sort of a sanction, something they've got to dodge, and the bottom ones where it's supposed to be supporting them but can actually be sort of holding them down. And then clubs like Bury, where you actually look and it's supposed to be protecting the fans primarily, and that's why it ends up in Parliament with them discussing it, because it ultimately is affecting those fans most deeply.
Lee, how different is the football business to any other business you've been involved in or anywhere your friends work? Tell us a bit about your day, as the life of a CEO running a top football club?
Well, it's never boring. It's never the same day twice. It's constant challenges. The way I always describe it is it's like running 6 or 7 SMEs. Because you've got the mass entertainment, you've got the publications one, you've got the retail one, you've got the constant banqueting one. So it is a real mix. But I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's great because it's so diverse. It beats working 9 to 5. That's for sure.
And tell me, I'm just going to ask a question on behalf of my best friend who's a QPR fan. When will they be back in the Premier League?
As soon as possible.
Hugo, what do you think is going to happen next year then? Are we reaching a stage where the Premier League will be devoid of 2 of its star attractions?
I don't think so. I think, sadly, the brand story is too strong there. I think the Manchester City and Chelsea fans also would be, very upset. Yes, they've enjoyed some seasons of success, but they also aren't sat in the boardroom and making these decisions. But what I hope happens is something fair with comparison to what's happened to Everton and for Man City and Chelsea, whether it's looking in the past or looking to the future. I think it should be significant because they seem like much larger breaches than what was, I think, a fault of ambition by Everton.
Hugo, Lee, Sanny and Robert, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for me, Enda Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.